The morning of the reunion, I woke up smiling. At 72 years old, I still felt excited like a child on Christmas whenever the whole family gathered under one roof. For 3 weeks, I had prepared everything myself. I ironed tablecloths, polished silverware, cooked sauces from scratch, hung old family photos across the hallway. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen before sunrise. Outside, soft snow covered the Colorado mountains surrounding my little house. And for the first time in years, I believed maybe my family still needed me. Maybe I still mattered. I shuffled toward the hallway, calling out softly, "Daniel?" No answer. I smiled anyway, probably still asleep. My son and his wife had arrived late the previous night after driving from Denver. I remembered hearing them laughing downstairs around midnight while I pretended to sleep upstairs. Hearing my son laugh used to heal something inside me. But that morning, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. I walked past the guest room. The bed was empty. Perfectly made. My stomach tightened. Claire. Silence. Then I noticed it. The front closet was open. Their winter coats were gone. So were their suitcases. At first, I thought maybe they'd gone out for coffee. Then I saw the envelope sitting on the kitchen counter beside the reunion seating chart I spent 2 days making by hand. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Dad, we didn't want to make this awkward. Claire booked a last-minute luxury resort trip in Aspen, and honestly, we needed a break. The reunion thing feels emotionally draining every year. You'll be okay. There's food in the fridge. We'll call next week. Daniel." I read it 3 times, then a 4th. Not because I didn't understand the words, because I couldn't believe my own son had written them. "You'll be okay. After everything, after 30 years of raising him alone. After working night shifts at the steel factory when his mother left us. After selling my wedding ring to pay for his college books. After surviving heart surgery 2 winters ago with nobody sitting beside my hospital bed except a volunteer nurse. You'll be okay." I slowly sat down at the kitchen table while snow drifted outside the windows. And something inside me cracked so quietly, nobody would have heard it, not even God. I looked around at the decorations, the candles, the reunion gifts, the homemade pies cooling near the stove. Every single thing I had done was for people who treated my love like background noise. My phone buzzed, a text from Claire. "Please don't guilt Daniel about this. He deserves happiness too." That was the moment the sadness disappeared, and something colder took its place. Not rage, not screaming, clarity. For years, I had mistaken sacrifice for love. I thought if I kept giving, eventually people would give back. But some people don't love the hands that feed them. They only love the convenience. I stared at the family trust documents sitting in my desk drawer. Nobody knew existed. 10 years earlier, after selling part of my land to a developer, I quietly invested the money, smartly, carefully. Over time, it became nearly $2.8 million. Daniel assumed I was nearly broke. I let him believe it, because I wanted to know whether my son loved me or my future inheritance. That morning, I finally got my answer. And for the first time in my life, AP chose myself. 3 days later, the reunion happened without them. But something unexpected happened too. People came, neighbors, old church friends, my former co-workers, widows from town, a single mother from down the road whose car I fixed last winter. 37 people filled my home. They laughed louder than my family ever had. One little girl hugged me after dinner and whispered, "This feels like a movie, Christmas." And I nearly cried right there beside the fireplace. Because strangers appreciated what my own blood ignored. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone holding a cup of coffee when my attorney called. "Are you certain about the changes to the trust, Mr. Whitaker?" I looked around the quiet living room at the fading fire, the empty hallway, the untouched guest room, and I answered calmly, "Yes." Over the next month, I made arrangements. Half the money went to local scholarships for children who lost parents. Another portion funded a community shelter for elderly veterans. The rest created a trust for caregivers and hospice volunteers. Daniel's inheritance? $1, legally intentional, impossible to contest. I didn't do it to destroy him. I did it because wealth should go where love already exists, and love did not exist in that luxury resort. 2 months later, Daniel finally visited, not because he missed me, because he learned the truth from my attorney. He stormed into my house furious. "You gave everything away?" I looked at him quietly from my chair. "Yes. You're punishing me because we took one vacation?" I studied his face carefully, the expensive jacket, the perfect haircut, the same blue eyes he had as a little boy, and suddenly I saw it clearly. He wasn't angry about losing me. He was angry about losing access to me. "You abandoned me on reunion morning," I said softly. "Oh, come on, Dad, stop acting dramatic. My voice cracked for the first time. I had open heart surgery alone. Silence. "I spent Christmases alone. Silence. I defended you your entire life. I sacrificed everything for you." His jaw tightened. "And you left me with a note beside cinnamon rolls. For the first time in years." My son had nothing clever to say, no excuse, no sarcasm, nothing, because deep down, he knew. He looked away and muttered, "Claire thought the reunion was depressing." I almost laughed. Depressing, funny word. You know what's depressing? A father staring out the window every Thanksgiving wondering why his child stopped calling. A man eating birthday cake alone because everyone is too busy. A 72-year-old pretending not to notice he's becoming invisible. That's depressing. Not family photos and homemade pie. Daniel finally looked at me again. His anger was fading now. Something else was replacing it. Fear. Because for the first time, he realized the bridge between us had actually burned down. Not financially, emotionally. "You really gave it all away?" he whispered. "Yes, why?" I stared at the snow falling outside. Because despite everything, the answer was painfully simple. Because the people who appreciated my love deserved it more. His eyes watered then, and for one dangerous second, my heart almost softened. That's the tragedy of being a parent. Even after they break you, part of you still wants to hold them. But then I remembered waking up to that empty house, that note. "You'll be okay." And I realized something powerful. They were right. I would be okay, without being used, without begging for scraps of attention, without confusing loneliness for family. Daniel left 20 minutes later. No hug, no goodbye, just silence. I never saw Claire again. But something strange happened after that winter. My life became fuller. The scholarship students started visiting me every month. The veterans invited me to dinners. The hospice volunteers sent handwritten cards. On my 73rd birthday, 46 people showed up at my house carrying cakes, gifts, and candles. 46. Do you know how many family members came? None, and somehow, it hurt less than before. Because peace arrives the moment you stop chasing people who only love you conditionally. That night, standing on my porch while snow covered the mountains again, I finally understood something most people learn too late. Revenge isn't screaming. It isn't cruelty. It isn't making people suffer. The greatest revenge is building a beautiful life that no longer requires the people who abandoned you. 3 weeks after Daniel walked out of my house, spring arrived in the mountains. The snow began melting off the pine trees. Water rushed through the creek behind my property. And for the first time in years, AP stopped checking my phone every hour. No missed calls, no messages, no apology. At first, the silence hurt, then it became freedom. Every morning, I sat on my porch drinking black coffee while the sunrise painted the mountains gold. I started sleeping better, breathing easier, smiling for no reason. And slowly, something I thought had died inside me began returning, dignity. One afternoon, I drove into town for groceries when I noticed a teenage boy struggling outside the hardware store. His truck wouldn't start. Most people walked past him, I didn't. Turns out his name was Ethan, 19 years old, working 2 jobs trying to support his younger sister after their father overdosed the year before. While helping him fix the engine, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Gratitude, real gratitude, not entitlement, not obligation, just appreciation. After that day, Ethan started visiting every weekend, sometimes to help around the house, sometimes just to talk. He asked questions Daniel stopped asking 20 years ago. How did you build this place? What was Grandpa life like? How do you stay strong after losing people? And strangely, answering those questions healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. One evening, while we repaired my old fishing boat in the garage, Ethan looked at me carefully and asked, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Why does your son never come around?" The wrench in my hand froze. For a second, the old pain returned, sharp, familiar. But then I surprised myself. I shrugged calmly. Sometimes people stop valuing things they think will always be there. Ethan nodded slowly like he understood more than a 19-year-old should, then he quietly said something I'll never forget. "Well, he's missing out." Nobody had ever said that before, not once. For years, people told me to forgive, to understand, to be patient. But nobody ever looked me in the eyes and admitted the truth. That my son was the one losing something valuable. That sentence stayed with me for days. He's missing out. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was beginning to crack apart. I didn't know it at first. Small-town news travels slowly. Apparently, Claire lost her luxury marketing job after company layoffs. Then their Aspen condo deal collapsed. Then the credit card debt started surfacing, the expensive vacations, the designer furniture, the lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. One night, my phone rang around midnight. "Daniel." I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. His voice sounded different, smaller. "Dad." I stayed silent. Then I heard him breathing shakily. Claire left. The words hung in the darkness between us. Part of me expected satisfaction, but honestly, I just felt tired. "She said I changed after the inheritance situation," he whispered. "Inheritance situation, interesting choice of words, not after abandoning me, not after years of neglect, after the money disappeared." I closed my eyes. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. "What do you want from me?" "Daniel?" Silence. Then finally, "I don't know." For the first time in his life, my son sounded like a scared little boy again. And that nearly destroyed me, because parents never completely stop loving their children, even when they should. He started calling more after that. At first, awkward conversations. Weather, sports, small talk, like two strangers forced into the same elevator. Then one evening, he asked quietly, "Did you really sit alone after surgery?" I looked out toward the mountains. "Yes." Another silence, longer this time. Then I heard him crying, not loud, just quiet, ashamed tears. I didn't know it was that bad, and there it was. The sentence I waited years to hear. "Not sorry." Understanding, real understanding. But pain doesn't disappear just because someone finally notices it. That's the part people never talk about. An apology can stop the bleeding. It cannot erase the scar. Weeks later, Daniel came to visit again. This time, he looked nothing like the polished corporate man from before. No expensive coat, no perfect confidence. Just a tired 40-year-old carrying regret heavier than luggage. When I opened the door, he stood there holding a paper bag. "What's this?" I asked. He gave a nervous half-smile. "Cinnamon rolls." My chest tightened instantly. Because he remembered, the kitchen became painfully quiet. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he whispered, "I was cruel to you." Simple words, but honest ones. And honesty carries weight. I nodded slowly and motioned him inside. We sat at the same table where I once opened that terrible note. Only now, everything felt different. Older, sadder, realer. Daniel looked around the room at the family photos still hanging on the walls. "You kept all these?" "Of course," I said softly. "You weren't a bad memory, son." That broke him. He covered his face with both hands and cried harder than I had ever seen before. Not polished tears, not performative guilt. The kind of crying that comes from finally seeing yourself clearly. And I realized something important in that moment. People don't truly mature when life rewards them. They mature when life removes every distraction and forces them to face who they became. Hours later, before leaving, Daniel stopped beside the front door. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment, then I answered honestly, "No, you don't." His face fell. "But," I continued, "that doesn't mean healing is impossible." Hope flickered in his eyes, small, fragile, like the first light after a brutal winter. From then on, things changed slowly, not magically. Trust rebuilds like a burned forest. One tree at a time. Daniel started visiting twice a month, then every weekend. Sometimes we fished. Sometimes we cooked. Sometimes we just sat silently on the porch watching the mountains breathe beneath the sunset. And little by little, he became my son again. Not because of money, because for the first time in his adult life, he finally understood the cost of love. One autumn evening nearly a year later, Daniel asked me something unexpected. "Do you regret giving the money away?" I smiled softly. "No, not even now." I shook my head. Because the truth was beautiful. That money saved lives, fed families, created scholarships, built shelter beds, funded hope. And strangely enough, losing the inheritance may have been the only thing that saved my son too. That night, after he left, I stood alone on the porch while cold wind rolled through the mountains. The sky glowed orange behind the trees, and I thought about revenge. How badly we crave it when we're wounded. How we fantasize about making people hurt the way they hurt us. But life taught me something wiser. Real revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. It's becoming so whole that the people who broke you are forced to confront the version of you they can no longer control. And sometimes, if they're lucky, it changes them too. 2 years passed after that. 2 quiet, complicated, beautiful years. The kind of years nobody writes movies about because healing rarely looks dramatic. It looks like small moments, a son showing up on time, a father no longer pretending he isn't hurt, coffee shared in silence, fishing lines cast into still water, conversations that finally tell the truth. Daniel changed slowly, not perfectly, but genuinely, and I learned something difficult during that time. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering everything and choosing not to let it poison what remains of your life. Still, there were scars between us. Some wounds heal, others simply become lighter to carry. One December evening, Daniel arrived earlier than usual. Snow drifted softly outside, while the fireplace crackled in the living room. But the second I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. His face was pale, eyes exhausted, hands trembling slightly. "Dad," he said quietly, "can we talk?" Fear immediately gripped my chest. At my age, you learn bad news often arrives wearing a calm voice. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where our family once broke apart. Daniel stared down at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I went to the doctor last week. My stomach tightened, and," he swallowed hard, "it's my heart." Suddenly, the room felt smaller, colder. The irony hit me instantly. "Heart problems, just like mine. They found a serious blockage," he continued. "I need surgery." I looked at him carefully. And for one terrifying second, AB didn't see the 42-year-old man sitting across from me. I saw the little boy who used to run into my arms after nightmares, the child I carried on my shoulders through county fairs, the teenager I defended during school fights, the son I loved even when loving him became painful. Fear doesn't care how old your child becomes. A parent's heart remains vulnerable forever. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared." 3 simple words, but they shattered me, because years earlier, I had spoken those same words silently in a hospital bed with nobody beside me, and now life had brought us full circle. I reached across the table and grabbed his shaking hand. "You won't go through this alone." The second those words left my mouth, Daniel broke down crying, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because he finally understood its cost. The surgery was scheduled 3 weeks later in Denver, and this time AB was there every single day. I sat beside his hospital bed through endless nights listening to machines beep in dark rooms. I argued with nurses when his pain medication was delayed. I held his hand when fear overtook him before surgery. And on the morning they wheeled him toward the operating room, he suddenly grabbed my sleeve. Tears streamed down his face. "Dad." I leaned closer. "If something happens to me," his voice cracked completely, "I'm sorry for all the years I wasted." My throat tightened instantly. I squeezed his shoulder hard. "Nothing's happening to you." But deep inside, AB knew life makes no promises. The surgery lasted 6 hours. 6 unbearable hours. I paced hospital hallways so long my knees nearly gave out. Every terrible possibility invaded my mind. And during those endless hours, I realized something painful. No matter how deeply someone hurts you, if you truly love them, part of your heart will always pray for their survival. Finally, the surgeon appeared. I stood so quickly my chair crashed backward. "She's stable," the doctor said. Relief hit me so violently I nearly collapsed. Stable, one word, one miracle. That night, while Daniel slept heavily under dim hospital lights, I sat beside him quietly, and suddenly, memories flooded me. His first baseball game, teaching him to shave, helping him move into college, all the years before life complicated us, before pride, before selfishness, before emotional distance. I realized something then. Children don't wake up one day and decide to stop loving their parents. Life distracts them slowly. Careers, marriage, bills, ego, stress, and sometimes they don't realize what they neglected until losing it becomes possible. At around 2 a.m., Daniel woke up weakly. The room was nearly dark except for the glow of hospital monitors. When he saw me sitting there, his eyes watered instantly. "You stayed?" I almost laughed softly. Of course I stayed. Because despite everything, AP was still his father. Weeks later, after Daniel recovered, something changed permanently between us. Not emotionally, spiritually. The walls finally disappeared. One snowy afternoon, we sat together on my porch wrapped in blankets drinking coffee. The mountains looked silver beneath winter clouds. Daniel stared quietly at the horizon before speaking. "You know what scares me most?" "What?" "That I almost became the kind of man who only understands love after it's almost gone." I nodded slowly. Most people do. That's the tragedy of modern life. We postpone love, like we're guaranteed more time, more holidays, more phone calls, more chances, until suddenly there aren't any left. Then one evening near Christmas, Daniel surprised me again. "I sold the condo," he said, "the Denver one." He nodded. "What for?" He smiled nervously. "I bought land 15 minutes from here." I stared at him in shock. "You're moving back? If that's okay?" For a moment, neither of us spoke. The mountains stood silent around us while snow drifted through the pine trees. And right there on that porch, something inside me healed completely, not because my son returned, but because this time, he returned willingly. Months later, construction began on his new home, not a mansion, not a luxury property, just a quiet cabin near the mountains, close enough for Sunday dinners, close enough for fishing mornings, close enough for life. One evening while helping him unload boxes, I found something strange sitting in his kitchen, an old framed note. My eyes narrowed. It was the original reunion note. "You kept this." Daniel looked embarrassed. "I read it sometimes." "Why would you keep that memory?" He stared at it quietly. "Because I never want to become that person again." And honestly, that hit harder than any apology ever could. Years passed after that. Peaceful years. Real years. The kind filled with ordinary moments people underestimate until they become memories. Then, one autumn morning, shortly before my 78th birthday, Daniel arrived at my house carrying a small little girl in his arms. My granddaughter, 4 years old, curly brown hair, big blue eyes. She looked around my kitchen curiously before pointing at the cinnamon rolls cooling near the stove. "What are those?" Daniel laughed softly. "Family history." I smiled harder than I had in years. The little girl climbed into my lap without hesitation. Children don't care about old wounds. They only recognize warmth. And as she leaned against my chest, I looked over at my son standing quietly across the kitchen. Older now, humbler. Human, again, our eyes met for a long moment. No words needed, because some stories don't end with revenge. They end with redemption. And sometimes, that's the more powerful ending of all.